Hello, souls and demons, and welcome back. Today is the 7th and final part of I Found My Likeness in a Torture Game, written by Cecily 1987. And now with that, let's finish this story by sitting back, gripping our seats, and enjoying the show. Are you done screaming? My torturer asked me as I shook with rage, tied in the damned Y position. I'll leave you and Mel alone, so you can enjoy your last moments together, Harold said with satisfaction. Aw, Harold chided me. It's your last moment with anyone else besides me for the rest of your life. And when he finally dies horribly in front of you, that will be your last memory. Finally, I'll come back in and throw you in the dark cell for a while, so you can fully digest the sweetest despair I have blessed you with. Maybe I'll leave you in the dark for a week, maybe just a day. I don't know. Depends on how much I start to miss you, he said to himself mostly, as he walked away from Mel and me. I watched him through shivers of panic and fear, while Mel began to fidget uncomfortably in his wheelchair across from me. He was already sweating profusely and having trouble breathing. Harold had almost completely exited the kill room, but stopped after throwing back the tarp wall. He was obviously trying to remember something, like how you go through a mental checklist before you leave the house. Ah, yes. He snapped his leather gloves and walked back to Mel. The snake venom will make you drowsy, but I want you to at least give my pet here a solid farewell. He grabbed the green syringe from the tray and stuck Mel. So this will be sure to keep you awake, and your big heart pumping for a good, long while. Mel growled at him and lunged forward again, only to yelp in pain because of his restraints. Harold laughed and pointed at both of us with a stupid grin on his face. This is the part in the movie where the villain leaves the captured hero long enough for the hero to make a daring escape, right? Too bad this is real life, and that Deus Ex Machina bullshit doesn't work here. I'm the only god in this machine. He pointed at the tarp wall behind Mel. I'll be watching you two the whole time, so don't get smart with me, or you will be punished. As I looked to where Harold was pointing, I could see a circular hole cut out at the top, just big enough for a camera to film through. It was accompanied by the faint glow of a red record light from somewhere on the other side. I sighed in despair, and my heart turned cold. Harold was right. It wasn't like the movies. I guess in real life, the villains probably win most of the time. I'll be watching you two on my phone, so... Harold shot finger guns at us. Behave yourself. And with that smug comment delivered, he walked out of the room to prepare my dark cell. Me and Mel stared at each other for a few seconds. I could see the pain written all across his face, but yet he carried on, trying to remain stoic. He was sweating heavily and randomly twitching or seizing up in pain. I'm so sorry, Mel, I started to tell him, my voice already beginning to crack. Mel actually smiled at me, sighed loudly and rolled his eyes. In slow, precise movements, he lifted both of his hands upwards, from their position from being nailed palms down to the arm of the wheelchair. His bloodied hands moved upwards, painfully sliding their way up the large nails which impaled them. Mel didn't have much slack to lift his forearm off the arm of the chair, due to the tightly wrapped wire. But I realized Mel had gained a lot more wiggle room from before by his constant attempts to attack Harold. Also conveniently, Most of the muscle twitches seemed to be suspiciously centered around Mel's arms, further pulling the wires loose. With a flexibility most likely caused by adrenaline, the fear of imminent death, and the uppers Harold had stupidly given him, Mel bent his hands upwards and out from beneath the wicked bite of the nails. Shaking horribly, Mel angled both of his arms inwards towards his chest the best he could, without giving away what he was doing to the camera behind him. Both thumbs met each other, and then he pushed them outwards towards me. He opened a hand and held it bladed towards me as he attempted to lift it up to his mouth, as he scrunched his head down towards it. "Keep talking," is what Mel just said to me in sign language. Oh my God, when did he learn ASL? So keep talking I did, and Mel told me what we were going to do. I'm not going to tell you the whole plan Mel worked out with me. I'm still an actress at heart, and want a surprising and satisfying conclusion for my viewers and listeners. But still, it was hard to decipher a lot of what Mel meant through his very real convulsions, restricted range of motion, and shaking and bleeding hands. "Okay," Mel signed to me. "Let's go." Mel had went over the plan 3 times. 15 minutes had passed and Mel was looking like he was on death's door. Already blood was seeping from his sweaty forehead. It had to be now, or we were both doomed. He began shaking the wheelchair violently back and forth, being sure to make a good scene for the camera behind him. Once he slipped his hands free of the wiring, he held them out to his side and screamed like an animal, like the beast Harold was treating him as. We were only a couple of feet away from each other, but I knew Mel couldn't walk because of Achilles' tendons being cut. So I knew he was going to have to throw himself at me, and it was going to hurt. Mel grabbed the syringes left on the tray between us in his left hand and flung himself at me. All 300 pounds of him smashed against me. But through the pain, I felt the rays of hope. Mel grabbed me around the waist and shook the table we were on as he pulled himself up. Another one of Mel's giant arms hooked around my neck and shoulders, and I tried my hardest to use my body to help brace him as he performed the most delicate part of the escape plan. Both of us were squished together, face to face. Mel's right arm angled around the back of my head. He secretly grabbed the yellow syringe with his left hand and hid it between my panties and butt, pressed against the table. With that work done, he used his left arm to steady himself by holding onto the Y frame that held my right arm suspended. This took most of his pressing body weight off of me, and I began to do my part of the plan. I had to do what I did best. I had to act. "Kill me, Mel," I screamed in a panic. "Do it quick before he comes back, please. I don't want to be his pet forever." Mel, with the red syringe in his right hand, stuck the needle into the exposed top of my left breast. But he was careful not to push down on the pump. "No, Mel, not the syringe. I don't want to die like that, not like you." I screamed and thrashed against him. "Just do it quick, please. Not like you, strangle me. Break my neck, please, something quick." So now Mel changed tactics. He had listened to my pleas for mercy. He would grant me a quick death, unlike the one he was doomed to suffer. So he studied his banging, propped-up position with his left hand and placed his right hand around my throat. And I began the greatest act of my lifetime by pretending I was dying. In the relative quiet of Mel flexing his forearm and pretending to choke me, and me letting out occasional gagging noises, we had no idea if our charade had worked. So we listened for the echo of footsteps approaching, and finally, we heard them coming rapidly towards us. Now came the next stage of the plan, as Herald of the Void burst through the black tarp wall to scream in defiance at Mel. "Let her go, you stupid bastard! She's mine!" Mel whipped his head around to face Harold, no longer acting. He let out a primal growl of hatred. Harold saw the red syringe sticking out of my skin, and his eyes went wide with shock. Harold lunged at me and Mel, but Mel quickly retrieved the syringe in an attempt to stab his hated enemy that had foolishly run in without thinking. But the psycho bastard reacted quickly by closing the distance and catching Mel's raised arm with both of his own. Mel shifted his body weight against me and pushed off of me to lunge at Harold. Harold caught Mel, but Mel's body weight pulled them both to the ground. On the way down, Mel grabbed my left arm around the wrist and pulled down as quickly and as hard as he could. There was a wicked pop as my thumb dislocated, and skin tore off as my left hand was ripped down and free from the restraints. Thank God the numbing effect from the yellow syringe was still affecting the pain levels in my hand. My left hand was still completely numb, and most of the pain was coming from around my wrist where Mel had grabbed me. I had no way to know how damaged my hand really was from the stunt Mel pulled. Mel and Harold tussled on the ground. Harold was smart enough to realize he was at a major weight disadvantage in the ground fight with the enraged and dying bodyguard. So he quickly tried to slip out from underneath Mel. And he almost got away. Harold quickly tried to scramble to his feet, with Mel laying on the ground between us. But Mel had tasted blood in the water and wasn't done fighting. Mel's death roar even filled me with terror. Mel sprung upwards on his knees to grab a hold of Harold's belt and pants. This was followed by a massive headbutt tackle to Harold's stomach, toppling him over with Mel hot on his trail, crawling after him. I began doing my job as the two wrestled on the ground. I shook my left hand vigorously, trying to get the feeling to return to my fingers. The clasp on my right hand restraint and feet were simple and not locked. I guess the all-knowing Herald of the Void never thought we would get this far. Now all I needed was the feeling to return to my hand, and I could unlock myself and help Mel. I heard Mel scream in pain, and I looked up to see Harold underneath him, stabbing Mel with that damn knife he kept showing off earlier. He must have had it in a back pocket, and he was giving Mel the prison shank treatment. Blood sprayed out of Mel's side as he launched his final desperate assault. He dropped down all his body weight to pin Harold. Mel's head shot down and took a big, toothy bite out of Harold's pale cheek. I bet he wished he had knocked Mel's teeth out like he meant to do to me. Harold screamed and kept stabbing Mel as blood from the bite flooded over his ugly face. Mel started convulsing, but still had lockjaw on Harold's face. Harold kept stabbing and stabbing and stabbing. Finally, my heart broke as Mel stopped convulsing and laid still. Part of me did feel a sense of relief, though. He had gone out like a warrior. He had protected me till the very end, and I loved him so much for it. Harold just lay under Mel's body and whimpered and let out weak cries as he tried to catch his breath and unpin himself. I watched him pull Mel's jaw off his face while crying, and I almost laughed at the pathetic bastard, but I couldn't show my cards just yet. I was just beginning to feel my fingers after all. A good 5 minutes went by with Harold struggling to get out from under Mel, but finally he got free from the corpse and stood up on wobbly legs. Drenched in blood and with his left cheek missing, replaced only by mangled flesh, he stumbled over to me to inspect me with worry, like how a person inspects a prized vehicle after driving it through a hailstorm. He saw my limp and mangled-looking left hand and paid it no mind. "He didn't inject you with the red one, did he?" Harold asked, far away like he was in a dream. "I'll be able to tell shortly if he did, but the sooner you tell me, the better chances I have to keep the poison from really hurting you. So tell me if he did, or you will live a truly cursed life." Inspiration struck me as I bit my lip like I was indecisive. My day of acting for my life wasn't over yet, it seemed. "He got me. He tried to hide it. He stuck me in my right armpit. I mumbled. I don't want to die like him. Oh no, my pet. Harold mumbled back sweetly to me and leaned in closer, tilting his head to look at my right armpit. I hope he didn't hit a vein. That causes the serum to take effect faster. Thanks for the advice. I mumbled back sweetly to him as I looked at the veins in his neck, and my fingers grasped the yellow syringe tucked in my underwear behind me. Mel knew Harold was smart enough to see a trap coming. If the red syringe was missing, Harold would know we were trying to use it on him. So the red syringe was a false flag, to get him to forget about the yellow one. Thank you, Mel. Your plan worked. I fought through the pain in my broken and torn left hand, just as Mel had done moments earlier, to raise the yellow syringe and stick it deep into a nice blue vein, standing out brilliantly on Harold's pale neck. I pushed down on the pump and juiced the bastard full of his own medicine. His body went limp and he fell like a sack of garbage, knocking over the metal tray beside us as he smacked the tiled ground. Oh, Harold, the yellow one's a lot more potent than you initially advertised, I said nonchalantly as I began to free myself from my hand and leg restraints. Harold gurgled and wiggled on the ground, trying to recover his wits and stand up. In a matter of seconds, I freed myself completely from the damn table and kicked Harold in the stomach as he tried to wobble his way back onto his knees. Standing over him unbound caused the deep anger to burn back brightly within me. I looked over Mel's naked body, and my teeth started to grind on their own. I knew I was going to kill Harold. I wasn't going to take the high road like the heroes in my movies. I wasn't going to show heroic mercy. I was going to pay back all that pain with his death. Life wasn't like the movies. Harold limply tried to grasp my ankles as I walked away from him to pick up the knife he had stabbed Mel with. It was practically submerged in a pool of Mel's blood, the floor drain not big enough to drain the blood away quickly. The double-sided sharp knife felt good in my right hand as I stalked over to Harold and stood over him as he crawled away. I grabbed him by his curly, voluminous hair and pulled his head up and put my knee on his back. He let out the saddest cry. Let's see, I whispered to him as he struggled in vain. Your little game taught me a lot of cool ways to kill somebody. Which one should I do? Please, came his drunken voice. The yellow serum must be wearing off quickly. Shush, pet, I hissed, already deciding the torture method I was about to perform. There is no stopping the future that's coming for you. I placed the blade's edge just under his hairline and pulled his head up by a fistful of his curly bangs. The horrid sawing motion began, and the ripping sound of flesh being pulled away from his skull filled the room. There was an eerie moment of quiet as Harold sat back in shock as blood gushed down his face. Then the screaming began. God, I hope he could feel it. Alas, the act of scalping a man wasn't in me. Oh, I could have mentally done it, but physically my left hand hurt too much to keep pulling. I even tried to switch hands, but still, no dice. When I finally gave up, I had done enough damage to Harold anyways. He was half scalped, if that's a thing. A flap of his skin and hair had been pulled back 2 inches and flopped around like old lunch meat. I still wasn't done with him, though. I wanted him to suffer. He didn't get to die quickly. So I walked back to his feet and severed both his Achilles tendons with 2 clean slices. That's for Mel, I said, as he began mumbling incoherently to me. I figured now was a good time to figure out how to get out of this hellhole and not completely lose myself to the bloodlust. I pulled the tarp walls down easily to reveal we were in a bigger main room of some sort of warehouse. All the windows were boarded up, and I had no idea what time of day it was outside. Some of the things my bodyguards did had finally rubbed off on me, as I returned to Harold to pat down his pockets, and swatted away his feeble attempts to grab at me, and found a key ring holding tons of keys and an old cell phone. The cell phone had a password lock. It didn't matter. You could still dial out to 911, but that didn't work either. Why doesn't your cell phone work? Tell me and I may call you an ambulance, I demanded of him. I had no intention of upholding that last part, but if he could lie, then so could I. Building blocks signal, he mumbled, still freely bleeding from his head and looking super woozy. Please, I love you, he cried as I walked away from him. He pathetically pulled himself after me, leaving a blood trail behind like some sort of snail. I walked 30 feet across the giant room to a heavy sliding door with a padlock on it. I could hear Harold's groans as he pulled himself after me inch by inch, while I took my time trying out every key on the keychain. Finally, the keypad popped open, and I slid the door open to the crisp night air. We were in the mountains somewhere, but I saw a road and even the lights of civilization out in the distance. I was free, and I would run all night if I had to. No, please stay, came Harold's weak voice. I turned to see he was on the ground feet away, on the brink of passing out forever. I couldn't think of anything cool to say, so I just told him the truth. You're a loser, Harold. So die already, won't you? I closed the heavy door on him as he lay motionless, slightly weeping as the door latched behind me. I vowed to come back from Mel's body with every cop I could find. A couple feet out from the building, Harold's phone started vibrating. I looked at it to see multiple notifications and incoming text messages. I guess they were flooding in since I was out of the building. One opened itself onto the screen. Notice of excommunication. The gentlemen have heard about your extracurricular activities concerning a very famous actress that is in the public eye. This is an unacceptable risk to the many crows. Your accounts have been frozen, and you have been excluded from all member benefits until you are brought before the gentleman for final verdict. This phone will be traced and cleanup team is on standby to deliver you in person to the council. After about 30 seconds of me being terrified by the idea of another Black Ops team coming my way, I screamed as the phone sparked and started smoking. It had self-destruction like something from Mission Impossible. Long story less long. I got as far away from that warehouse as I could. It was a good hour or so before a passing group of teenagers noticed me running down the road in my underwear. They were even more freaked out when they recognized me as a movie star. I offered the boys a large sum of money, not to film me or tweet anything. I didn't even want them to call the cops. I asked them to drive me straight to the police department in the next town over. I had no idea how far the many crows assholes would go to keep me quiet. An hour later, I was with the cops. And 2 hours after that, a sizable amount of them raided the suspected warehouse where I was being held. I had been careful but wasted too much time. There was no evidence to speak of when the cops arrived. Both Mel and Harold's bodies were missing. There was a fresh scent of bleach everywhere. With all the evidence gone, and only eyewitness testimonies, it was labeled as just a kidnapping for me, while Mel and Stinton were only considered missing, and Daniel was a victim of assault. My publicist did a good job keeping the story out of the news. And I paid up with the teenagers that saved me to ensure their continued silence. Daniel and Tony made a full recovery. Daniel having a cool scar, and Tony retiring. I took a year off from acting to get some much-needed therapy after the whole ordeal. But I realized I had to be a fighter. I needed a new fight to survive the trauma. So I took up looking after Stanton's wife and 2-year-old. I moved Mel's grandma into a nicer rest home that was also closer for me to visit. I paid for Tony's retirement home, and I never stopped telling Daniel he was my hero. I went back to work for them. I went back to making a living for the ones that fought for me. I had to honor their sacrifice. This is also why I am finally writing this. I don't want the fame. I'm already famous. I'm doing it to tell their stories, so you know who the real heroes were. My therapist says it will help. I think it already has. But wait, don't you worry about retaliation from those many crows guys? I hear you ask. Well, let me end this all with a recap of a mysterious email I received months ago, before I started writing. Also, said email also deleted itself afterwards. Miss J. The Many Crows would like to apologize for the unprofessional behavior of one of our prior members. You can be assured that the whole matter has been dealt with internally, and you will never again be contacted or accosted by any member of our organization. Again, our most sincere apologies and well wishes.